This is Rodney Hamm, your candidate for 7th District Ohio Senator, just like my friend from Lebanon Citizens National Bank, Steve. Watergate happened in the 70s, and as my friend, Mr. Wilson, knows, Richard Nixon had to resign. And the reason that he resigned was because of wiretapping. Some would say the FBI and Hoover overstepped their bounds. It depends on the entire understanding, not just the perspectives of a few. And we do have a safeguard in place called Central Intelligence for the United States of America. But to offset things like Guantanamo Bay and gross negligence on the part of the United States military through its faulty leadership at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, we have the United Nations to stand tall for not just Americans, for refugees, for people who are misplaced without a home, imprisoned without a trial, and held against their will while their families are allegedly tortured to death over speaker systems so they can hear it until they want to kill themselves, but cannot. That is the evil that comes along with torture. It was brought to the United Nations through the sacrifice, I'm sure, of a few guilt-ridden soldiers who had to turn on Team Green, turn on their own command, and tell for the betterment of the world to stop the United States deep and decent upon other peoples. When Richard Nixon resigned, we never really got the full story. Gerald Ford took over and, from most accounts, became an alcoholic. So much so that Betty Ford opened a clinic that is world-renowned for addiction. Leadership seemed to take a turn, and along came an actor, Ronald Reagan, and his wife, Nancy, who began to complete the cycle of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, stemming all the way back from Joseph Stalin until Mikhail Gorbachev and Reagan's famous speech that said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down these walls," to unite the Germans, to unite belief systems, and some would say to ripple in its mindset to the fall of the Soviet Union, combined with the theories of John Keynes to build as many nuclear bombs as we could until the Soviet Union was broke, its economy busted, and the Cold War ended without a single bomb burst. In what I would consider to be the largest waste of American money in the history of this country. It was great for manufacturing, places like General Electric. We were hopping in the textile businesses, building our nuclear bombs, using up natural resources like uranium, printing up money left and right. Inflation seemed to tailspin. And then we ended up with President George Bush former CIA director, claim to fame was he was the man who called in the sniper actions to end Pablo Escobar. As we began our war campaigns in places famous for cocaine, like Panama, and our deep indista theory started to begin to show itself throughout Latin America, as America sort of enjoyed the prominence from the fallout in the Soviet Union, leading to me, Tammy Jones, Brenda Vincent, and a few select others, to join Miss Miller and talk to a team of Russian narcologists as something familiar with America began to touch the Soviet Union in the form of lost children, drug addiction, suicide, and overall deviance in society, because we were focused on war, on negativity, and on money in these 1980s. George Bush took office, and as I have pointed out many times, I-71 was built under Nixon and Kennedy and completed under Ford, as gas stations and fuel lines went up across the country to maintain our new traffic flow and our automotive demands. Unions became strong again, and suddenly we became dependent on our friends over in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, who, like Americans, tried to prosper on the oil demand through OPEC, through Gaddafi, Hussein, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and Osama bin Laden came along, trained by the United States and sent over there to balance the power between Iraq and Iran. And when we finally got done and Iraq fell, there was some planes that flew through the air and hit America. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, we were at war. Over what? It couldn't be this dependency upon oil that seemed to flourish through Standard selling off to Marathon and British Petroleum, could it? We began a campaign of wars against the Middle East in places so important as Kuwait, Afghanistan, Fallujah. As these wars subsided, mental illness crept in on a lot of our soldiers, something called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And what we did was, under the Reagan and Bush administrations, close the doors to places like Roman Psychiatric Institute and Wayne Avenue's mental facilities, shutting the doors, stopping the money, just like with St. Elizabeth Hospital, and a certain security guard and receptionist with tears in their eyes discussing how St. Elizabeth told no one, even after 20 years of service. They simply shut the doors and left. No more paychecks here in Dayton. With all this aggression and all this disappointment, it led us into what I consider to be the president who offered the most hope up until this point. Arkansas's governor, Arkansas Bill Clinton. As Bill came in, he inspired us through his speeches, through his education, and through his command of a presidential plan for all Americans to carry health insurance as well as hope for their children to be healthier, live longer, and become smarter through education plans he initiated in Little Rock. As he went for his second term, things took a turn for the better. Our books became balanced, politicians became bored, and started to creep into his personal life and started making fun of Chelsea, his marriage, and his wife in what I would consider to be the rudest act of gratitude ever for a president who balanced the books and did what his job was supposed to be, maintained peace, financial security, and the integrity of our country, except for an affair with the secretary. Something that happens every day in businesses, as we've all found out. After that, Bush, September 11th, war. We all remember those planes crashing into the buildings, and I'll never forget my father, me, and a man associated with Bell Volts doing a funeral for a man named Clark in the Miami Cemetery on top of the hill in the turnaround of Section K, I believe, as my wife fixed us sandwiches for lunch. We were all in shock. It was unbelievable. After that, things seemed to get worse. And then something miraculous happened. We had our first African American president, President Barack Obama, with his lovely wife, Michelle. I had moved on. I was now working at the University of Dayton, near ex-Governor Bob Taft. Dayton Public and Safety had become friends of mine. We had lots of discussions about cemetery life, friends, skepticism, hunting, and safety in general. As we did, I noticed something amazing happened in my store, which was 50% minorities, if not more. They cried. They rejoiced. I could feel it inside me. They were no longer something American. They were American. They were represented by someone who understood their struggles. Someone who believed in an America that was not white, that was not color-coded, it was not divided, it was not small, and it was not narrow. It was the world represented by the lady in the harbor holding the torch, saying, "Come to me, ye shall overcome. We shall provide hope, faith, and a plan for your future." And we are represented by Barack Obama, our president. Those were amazing times. Those were some of the best of times, not only personally but professionally, for Brock Anderson and Vale Miller, two people who had become close to me through business ventures that led me to the top in the Dayton market of America's greatest pastime when it comes to celebration, happy hour. After I left there, I bounced around a little bit, just like our political environment, actually, and ended up starting to study more about the drug war, my competitor in the alcohol business, as I watched people from prominent businesses on Brown Street lose their lives to indiscretionary prescribed medicines, and begin to watch my family fall apart. Some of them from the 70s, 80s, prescription drugs, and the toll it takes on your system over time. I began to notice the same faces, same names, same characteristics, and same routines in the outer circles of my family as they began to spiral downward into the same abyss, growing old before their time, not feeling healthy, not being happy. And here come the casinos to supplement the addiction process with something my father and I know all too well. Broke. Because of slot machines like the ones at the Post 615, where you put the money in, and sometimes they're live, and sometimes Dusty gets mad because they're gone. As I began to study all of this, I couldn't help but notice we had declared another war on drugs. We even appointed a czar, and I had to go back in history to my uncle Phil Armendariz in Washington, D.C., United States Air Force, who welcomed President Ford to the White House in Air Force One as his duties in the United States military. And Phil Armendariz was an American. We continue on this cycle of repeat, wash, and resent. And I got the privilege of going through the penal system, whatever level or grade you want to give it. It was as bad as it seems, from the food to the attire to the conversations, to the relationships that fall apart the minute you hit the door, that are promised afterwards. Friends for life, sober as us, yada, yada, yada. So I decided it was time for me to become president. It was time for me to step through the gallery halls and take the lead for my family, who left me alone in the abyss of depression, grief. I started to look and see these predatory lending drug addicts and drug dealers post up around my faraway families, and I began to mimic, imitate, and become part of their circles, gaining more and more information that was given to me at the cemetery about a civil rights murder, 1960s, Toyota parked across the street from my house, not 200 feet, probably belonging to the murder victim back when I-71 was built, a black man who stopped for help at Franklin and Main Street at Red Carnes gas station, which at one time was Ron Cronenberger's stepfather or step-grandpa. I do not remember. They took him over to the cemetery somewhere up front around the house, dug a hole, and stuck the man in the hole to cover up their hate crime back in the 60s. And I was told this story while digging Mr. Tietmeyer's grave, a local man known with a certain urgency by Warren County Probation Officer Charlie Morgan, whose son works down at the dispatch center in Warren County, and I'm sure has ties here with the fire department, like Ron Cronenberger did. I could talk about lessons I've given in life relationship categories. I won't. But what I do want to talk about is the effects that an affair can have on things like Presidents John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, both sharing love interest with the Brat Pack and Frank Sinatra. Frankie was around a long time, and there's a lot of great stories about Frankie, but I'll finish up my segment with this one. Frank Sinatra was responsible for getting Catholic president John Kennedy into office by swaying the Union votes through questionable friendships. And when John Kennedy got in, he called Frank and said, I want to thank you for all your support from the Teamster unions and all the votes that you helped me get. And when you come to the inaugural ball, please don't bring Sammy, because he has a white girlfriend. We don't need that kind of publicity right now. Rock Hudson, Sammy Davis Jr., and Don Rickles told the story. And Don Rickles looked over it and he said, that was a mistake. You don't know Frank's temper. Him and Sammy Davis are good friends. And he said Frank gets a tongue to him sometimes when he gets mad. Don Rickles looked over at him and they go. He said, Frank said, Mr. President, don't forget who put you there. If you don't allow my friend Sammy Davis Jr. to come to your ball, I'm not coming either. He hung up the phone. They said Sammy Davis Jr. looked at Frank Sinatra and said, it's okay, boss. I understand. I know the overall picture. It's important that you go, Frank. And Frank said, don't ever start telling me what to do. You know why? Frank's a leader. Frank knows what Frank wants. And Frank wanted civil rights. He wanted it done the right way. And Kennedy tried to turn up on him. Bobby came in with a different agenda. And what they did was, they upset the institution, the Ku Klux Klan. Next thing you know, bada bing, bada boom. Dallas, Texas. Kennedy gone, Bobby too. You have to do things a certain way in this country. So whenever somebody like Frank tells you, I got an agenda, so stand down, always remember, Frank did it his way. Elvis just sang about it.